The Will of the Honkai is a formless esoteric entity that resides in its own plane of existence and has a direct link with the imaginary tree that allows it to control the amount of Honkai energy that comes from the imaginary space into the base reality. Welcome to the second video in the Honkai Lore Explained video series. Today we will take a look at the mysterious entity referred to as the Will of the Honkai and also talk about the nature of the Honkai energy in the base reality. If you're interested in learning more about the Honkai, you can check out my previous video about the origins of the Honkai energy and the imaginary tree. The link is in the description. Now, without further ado, let's dive into the video. In the early parts of the game, we are told that Honkai is a mysterious phenomenon of unknown origins that happens to rise with the human civilization and grows stronger as the technology becomes more advanced. And this happens for a reason. As I mentioned in the previous video, Honkai is energy that is leaking from the imaginary tree. In its nature, it's a highly dangerous entropic energy that can cause natural disasters, diseases, and can manifest itself in many forms. One of those forms are the Honkai beasts. They are silicon-based life forms that embody the direct manifestation of the Honkai and can form in places with high Honkai energy concentration. Zombies, as the name suggests, they are corpses that are corrupted by the Honkai and act like mindless creatures enforcing its will. It's important to note that the game refers to zombies in chapter 2 as corpses brought back to life by the Honkai, but through the game we can also observe zombification as a state that can happen after a human being is exposed to Honkai energy and becomes infected. As we can see in chapter 9, when Tesla injects herself with a lethal dose of Honkai to test the Spear of Destiny, in her vision she saw herself transcending the zombie and becoming a mighty Honkai beast. So we can assume that the zombified state can both apply to corpses brought back to life and infected by the Honkai, and as a stage a corrupted organism goes when transforming into a Honkai beast. This part is a bit confusing because mihoyo never really go in depth in explaining this process, and also some definitions such as the one they gave in chapter 2 might be outdated, but to make it simpler for you to understand, think of it like this. If it's a creature with very distinct animalic or alien features, it's a Honkai beast, and if it's a mindless human-like creature, it's a zombie. Another form that the Honkai can take is the form of the subscribe button. See that red button below the video that says subscribe? That's the Honkai. You better press the button to eliminate it. So don't hesitate, press that subscribe button and be the hero that defeats the Honkai. Because Honkai is a form of energy, it can also be harnessed. In the previous era, humans had the technology to convert Honkai energy into normal energy to ensure that it could be safely used by anyone. Unfortunately, in the current era, this technology is not available and Honkai energy is used only in controlled mediums. Since it's a highly dangerous energy that can infect anybody that has a low Honkai resistance, its usage is very limited. Think of it as some sort of nuclear energy, but much more dangerous. The only thing that could handle it are special power plants designed to contain it, like the Babylon Towers, where Sirin was experimented on. Anti-Entropy uses it to power their mechs, Gestalt uses it to create artificial stigmata that they implant in humans with higher Honkai resistance to create Valkyries and for their weapons and battle suits, and Word Serpent uses technology from the previous era to safely combat the radiations. As far as we know, Honkai has two ways to enter base reality from the imaginary tree. One is through Harsher cores, specialized faucets that form inside the body of a Harsher that serve as a link with the imaginary space and can draw out the Honkai energy. And the second one, and most common, is through a dimensional leakage or dimensional bleed. We learn in chapter 25 EX that the entity known as the Will of the Honkai has control over that process. Knowing this, we can assume that the amount of Honkai energy present in our world is always controlled by a will. This may also explain why Honkai rises with humanity's advancements. In my previous video, I explained how the Honkai energy is used to test the civilizations on the imaginary tree. Well, in the same light, the will of the Honkai is the enforcer of the said test. There's also one thing that I want to make clear, and that's the fact that the will of the Honkai and the Herrscher of the End that we see in the previous era are not the same entity.
Thanks, Captain Obvious.
But you'd be surprised to find out how many people believe this misconception. The will of the Honkai is a formless entity that resides in its own plane of existence and has a direct link with the imaginary tree that allows it to control the amount of Honkai energy that comes from the imaginary space into the base reality. On the other hand, the Herrscher of the End is the final weapon of the Honkai, a Herrscher so powerful that when it arrives, no civilization stands a chance against it. Even if the Herrscher of the End is a powerful entity that has full control over the Honkai energy, it's still a Herrscher at the end of the day. It has a physical form and can be damaged. We know this because Kevin managed to knock her out for a few hours when they fought on the moon in the previous era. The existence of the will of the Honkai was rumored and theorized for many years, but it was never confirmed until the Second Eruption in the year 2000 when it came into direct contact with Sirin and Otto. We do not know yet if this entity that they came into contact with is a localized form of the will of the Honkai that only observes one base reality and acts based on the changes and evolution of the civilizations within it, or if it's a consistent force across all the branches of the imaginary tree. But from these encounters and what we learned from the later chapters of the game, we know that the will of the Honkai has no direct way of interfering with the world. All it can do is progress the evolution of the Honkai in the base reality by releasing more Honkai energy from the imaginary space, but even this process has certain limitations. We can see this very clear in chapter 25 EX when Otto manages to re-establish a connection with it. For a very long time, the will of the Honkai seemed like this powerful godlike being that could wipe us all out whenever it wants. But Otto states in chapter 25 EX that it might not be the case. It has the knowledge, but it seems to lack the power to do so at the moment. We do not know why or what that means. Maybe it is just not that powerful and we interpreted its meaning wrong. Maybe it's restrained by some rules and cannot exercise the full extent of its power, but it's clearly bothered by Kevin and Project Stigma, hence why it made a deal with Otto. The will of the Honkai seems to also have some kind of goal of its own, or at least it's aware of some deterrents that can cause some problems for its goal and is trying to prevent them by making a deal with Otto and allowing him to cut 500 years worth of time from the base reality branch of the imaginary tree. Most likely, as I previously said, its limitations have something to do with the test to determine if a civilization is worthy of receiving continuous support from the imaginary tree. This also tells us that the will of the Honkai has to play by some kind of rules and it's not necessarily an omnipotent force. To a certain degree, of course. It is also shown that the will of the Honkai possesses an almost limitless amount of knowledge regarding the imaginary tree, the multiverse, and the existence itself. During the Second Eruption, when Otto comes into contact with it for the first time, the will of the Honkai overloads his brain with so much knowledge that he literally cannot handle it. That is also when Otto realizes that the entity before him is truly a god compared to him. A very interesting prospect brought up by Otto in his dialogue with Durandal in chapter 27 is the fact that from the perspective of the will of the Honkai, which is basically in very simple terms self-aware Honkai energy, creating Herrschers represents the ultimate act of freedom, hinting at the fact that Herrschers are the ultimate form the Honkai can take and hinting that humanity is a necessary cage that helps solidify the Honkai.
That they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
This leaves room to interpret that the Honkai and humanity have a much closer relationship than people might have thought, implying that the civilization is basically some kind of storage for the Honkai that allows it to manifest in its truest form. I think that this is a very fascinating idea that will be further explored in the story as we progress and will play a major role when we will uncover more about its true nature. Oh, and speaking of Hershers, the Will of the Honkai can also choose a person to become a Hersher, but more on that in the next video exclusively dedicated to them. So until then, stay safe and see you guys next time.